My name is Billal, and the incident I am about to share with you today is connected to a wedding in our family. This happened about 4 years ago, when my maternal cousin Sonia's marriage was finalized, and we all gathered in our ancestral house in a small town in Punjab. Our ancestral house was in the older part of the town, a little off the main road where, as evening fell, shop shutters would begin to close, the sounds from tea stalls would soften, and if any sound remained in some part of the night, it was limited to a dog barking somewhere in the distance, the sound of a latch being closed from inside a door, or the rustling of trees moving in the wind. The house had a large wooden door with old brass nails embedded in it. Once you entered through the door, there was first a long corridor, then an open courtyard. On one side of the courtyard were rooms, on the other side a veranda and a dining area and old stairs leading to the upper floor. The walls were whitewashed with lime. The ceilings were high. Wooden beams were visible here and there. And throughout the house, there was a particular kind of old smell, a mixture of closed clothes, old wood, trunks, some hidden perfume, and sometimes incense, a fragrance that distinguishes such houses from ordinary ones. We had been coming and going from that house since childhood, but one part of the house was always such that after evening, everyone would instinctively avoid it. At the far end of the upper floor, there was a storage-like room where old utensils, wooden boxes, silk clothes, family heirlooms, and some items were kept, things that no one considered everyday use, but only things to be preserved. The elders used to say that there was a lot of dust there, old items scattered about, and children should not go there. But as I grew older, I also began to realize that some rooms are kept off limits to children not just because of dust. Some places are such that the people of the house do not say anything clearly, but their tone, their manner, and their caution tell you that not just items are stored there. Preparations for Sonia's wedding had been ongoing for several weeks, but the real commotion started when only a few days remained before the wedding and close relatives began to arrive one by one. Suddenly, that old silent house came alive. Cots were spread in the courtyard. Beds were set up in the rooms. Dupattas and clothes began to dry on the roof. The cooks put large pots on the stoves in the kitchen. The smells of spices, onions, curries, and sweets began to mix together. Children started running here and there. Cousins stayed up late talking, laughing, sometimes singing, sometimes practicing for the Mehndi rituals, and every corner of the house filled with the coming and going of people. But despite all this festivity, that old house kept its inner atmosphere intact, as if it was accepting the noise but not fully opening its old layers. Sonia herself was a very soft-natured and cheerful girl, but as the wedding day approached, a strange silence was growing in her. At first, we all thought it was the usual bride's nervousness, because at such times every girl sometimes laughs, sometimes becomes quiet, sometimes sits more with her mother, sometimes starts looking at old things. But now when I look back, I feel that there was something else going on inside her at that time, a feeling that we dismissed as just wedding pressure. 3 days before the wedding, it was afternoon. Most of the men had gone out for market or wedding errands, and inside the house, the women were taking out dowry clothes, utensils, dupattas, jewelry, and old things to arrange them. In our family, there was also a custom that if any old dowry item, a family bride's outfit, or a memorable piece was preserved, it should be looked at least once, even if not used, and brought forward as a mark of respect and for blessings. In this connection, an old wooden trunk from grandmother's time was remembered. It had been stored for years in the upstairs storage room. We had heard the name of that trunk since childhood. Someone would say it contained clothes from grandmother's time. Someone would say old photographs. Someone would say hand-embroidered dupattas. And from some people's tone, it seemed that the trunk also contained things that were not spoken of openly. The strange thing was that we always heard this sentence about that trunk: open it during the day, not after evening. As children, we took this just like other old-fashioned precautions. But that day, when it was actually decided to bring out the trunk, I saw for the first time the seriousness of that precaution on the elders' faces. A few elderly women of the house had decided that the trunk should be brought down. My maternal cousin Tarek, and two other cousins were sent upstairs to bring that heavy trunk from the storage room to the courtyard. When we reached upstairs, the door of the storage room was half stuck, as if it had not been fully opened for years. Inside was not complete darkness, because a small window high on the wall let in a thin ray of daylight. But even in that limited light, the dust of the room, the wooden boxes, the closed cupboards, the dust-covered items, and the silence settled in the corners felt as if the room had stopped in some other era. The trunk was placed in a corner. It was made of dark brown wood with brass plates on its edges, and a large lock hung on its front. Tarek, as usual, made a light joke. "If we find treasure inside, half is mine." But his voice echoed in the room in such a way that it seemed the walls had swallowed it back. When we lifted the trunk, we immediately felt that its weight was not just the weight of clothes. There was also a slight dampness in the wood, and an old, closed-up smell rose from it, as if something that had been shut for years wanted to remind that inside it, not only items but time itself was preserved. When the trunk was placed in the courtyard, all the women gathered around it. At that moment, the atmosphere of the house was filled with joy, curiosity, and a fondness for family memories. Aunt Roxana sent for the key. When the trunk was opened, on top were indeed the things we had heard about. Layers of old muslin and silk clothes, one or two hand-embroidered dupattas, old shawls, yellowed photographs, a small silver box, and a beautifully crafted small wooden casket. A wave of happiness passed through the room. Someone picked up a photograph and began recognizing faces. Someone said, "This looks like grandmother's wedding outfit." Someone was amazed at the old embroidery, saying, "Where would one find such handwork now?" Sonia was also sitting there, and at first, she too was looking at these things like everyone else. But when the last layer of clothes was removed, an envelope appeared underneath, and for some reason, that one thing changed the very breath of the whole atmosphere. That envelope was not of ordinary paper. It was made of thick yellow paper, the kind that used to be used in the old days for important correspondence. Its edges had become stiff, and on the front was a seal of red wax. The seal was not broken, but there were faint marks of pressure on it, as if someone had once thought of opening it and then stopped. On top, only a few words were written. As soon as those words were read, the noise in the courtyard seemed to be sucked inward in a moment. The women who had been laughing until then suddenly fell silent. Aunt Roxana immediately reached out and picked up the envelope. I saw for the first time on her face that expression which is not ordinary surprise or panic, but the recognition of something very old and familiar coming back to light. My mother immediately said softly, "Leave it for now." Sonia also raised her head and looked at the envelope, and God is my witness. The expression on her face at that moment was not a bride's ordinary curiosity. It was an attention as if she was not unfamiliar with that thing, but on some level, already acquainted with it. I asked Tarek what was inside it, but he shrugged. The elders began whispering among themselves. Finally, it was decided that the envelope should either be opened before the evening prayer or not opened at all. But as often happens, a decision was made, but it could not be acted upon immediately. The house was noisy with preparations. The cook was busy in the kitchen. Some people were waiting for relatives arriving from outside. And someone said, "Who has time to sit and read calmly right now? We'll see after the evening prayer." Hearing this, Aunt Roxana said in a strict tone, "Not after evening prayer, never." The seriousness of her tone was so striking that we were all startled. But then no one explained the matter fully. The envelope was placed on a small table, covered with a cloth, and it was assumed that hiding it like that would lessen its burden. But some things, once you hide them from the eyes, do not hide from the heart. And that envelope now came into the focus of the whole house. The evening began to fall. The bulbs in the courtyard were lit. The smell of curry began to come from the kitchen. Children returned to their noise. The men came back from the market. Any outsider looking in would have thought it was an ordinary, joyful house where wedding preparations were at their peak. But during that time, I noticed two things especially. First, Sonia kept looking again and again toward the table where the envelope lay under the cloth. And second, 2 or 3 times from the direction of the upstairs storage room, sounds came as if someone was walking with light steps and then stopped at one place. At first we thought perhaps some cousin had gone upstairs, but when Tariq went to check there was no one there. He came down and said with a laugh, "It's an old house. The wood speaks." But his face had no smile. After the evening prayer, the atmosphere of the house suddenly began to feel heavy. This was not just the effect of nightfall, but also because that envelope had still not been opened, nor had it been put back in its place. Some things, when taken out of their original place and their resolution is postponed, are no longer mere things. They become a case of delay, and the whole house begins to live with that case. After dinner, people dispersed to their own sections. The men's gathering went to one side, the women went to the inner rooms, and we young cousins sat in the courtyard chatting lightly. But now the conversation no longer had its earlier liveliness. During this, I stopped when I heard my mother and Aunt Ruxana speaking softly from inside. The door was not fully closed and I could just hear one voice saying, "I told you not to take it out again." And another voice replied, "If old things were to be seen with the dowry, then everything had to come out." If I had gone inside and asked, they would surely have changed the subject. So I moved away silently. But my heart now felt for the first time that the matter was not about some letter or sentences written on paper, but about something that some elders of the house already knew. Around 9:30 at night the electricity went out. Load shedding was common in our town. The generator would start in a few minutes, but in those few minutes of darkness, the house changed its shape. Mobile torches began to light up here and there. A candle was placed in a corner of the courtyard. Someone sat the children close. And in these very moments, my eyes went to the table where the envelope was kept under the cloth. I clearly felt as if someone was standing there. I immediately pointed my torch light there, but there was nothing. I might have doubted my own feeling, but the very next moment, Sonia's voice came. Very soft but clear. "Who moved the cloth?" We all saw that indeed the cloth was no longer fully over the envelope. One corner had slipped, and the surface with the red seal was reflecting in the dim light. No one admitted to having moved the cloth. Then the generator started. The light returned, but the atmosphere of the house was no longer what it had been. Aunt Ruxana immediately went and picked up the envelope and said, "I'll put this upstairs." My mother strictly forbade it, saying, "Taking it upstairs is absolutely not appropriate." Finally, it was decided that the envelope would be locked inside a cupboard in an inner room and opened after the morning prayer. This was a sound decision, but there are times when even the right decision, if taken too late, becomes just a formality. The night grew. The cousins went to their rooms. Some elders stayed awake. Sonia was in the inner room with her sisters and aunt, and we boys lay down in the room next to the courtyard. I, Tariq, and Asad were in the same place, but none of us had sleep in our eyes. Around 11:30, a woman's startled cry came from inside. We rushed there and found out that Sonia had sat up in a half-dazed state and said, "Do not open the envelope. She will come back." At first, everyone thought that due to fatigue, emotions, and wedding pressure, she might have spoken in a dream. When she was fully woken, she was completely normal. In fact, she did not even remember having said anything. But this time, the color had truly drained from Aunt Ruxana's face. She came out of the room, stood in front of us, and for the first time said clearly, "Let morning come. Then I will tell you everything." Her sentence ended all other speculations. Now we all knew that there was something that was not just a family tale, but a buried warning, an old precaution, or perhaps an old experience that had been deliberately hidden. Now obviously, no one could sleep. We returned to the courtyard, but such a silence had descended on the whole atmosphere that even the ordinary sounds of the house became more prominent. Somewhere the wood of the ceiling creaked, somewhere water dripped, somewhere in a distant room a cot shifted. And in the midst of all this, a sound came from the upstairs floor, as if something heavy had been dragged and shifted slightly. Asad sat up immediately. Tariq said, "The wind must have moved a door." But the very next moment, 3 clear knocks were heard from upstairs, separate with equal intervals, neither too loud nor too soft. The 3 of us looked at each other, but at that moment, no one even mentioned going upstairs. Sometimes fear is not in what you hear, it is in what you do not dare to confirm. The time before dawn seemed as if it would never end that night. As the night deepened, the layers of festivity fell away one by one, leaving only the house's true silence. But as soon as the call for the morning prayer was heard, I truly felt a pressure lift from the house. The sound of the adhan echoed against the old walls and spread through the courtyard, and with it, a small crack appeared in the heavy burden of the night. After the prayer, we all gathered in the large room. Sonia was sent to another room on some pretext. Aunt Roxana took the envelope out of the cupboard. This time, there was no wedding noise in the room, no laughter of women, no children's voices. Only that silence in which people make space inside themselves to hear something important. Aunt Roxana held the envelope in her hand and said softly that this envelope was not part of grandmother's dowry. Rather, it had been kept in the trunk since the time of grandmother's elder sister, and it was kept sealed because, after being read once, it was never to be opened again. Then the seal was broken, and from inside came an old, folded letter. It had been written by a woman, but it was not an ordinary letter. From beginning to end, a fear was embedded in its writing, not just in the words, but felt between the lines. Sometimes the words seemed to run into each other. Sometimes the ink had spread as if the writer's hand was trembling, and sometimes it seemed that the pen had stopped before completing a sentence out of some fear. Aunt Roxana unfolded the old letter. The paper was brittle, its edges yellowed with age. The ink had faded in some places, but the words were still legible. She cleared her throat and began to read aloud, her voice trembling slightly. The letter was written by a woman, our grandmother's elder sister, whose name was Amna. She had written it many decades ago in the days leading up to her own wedding. The letter was addressed to no one in particular. It was more like a confession, a warning, a desperate plea to whoever might find it in the future. In the letter, Amna wrote that during the days before her marriage, when the women of the house were taking out old bridal clothes, dupattas, and jewelry, she saw for the first time a glimpse of a face inside her dowry trunk, a face that did not belong to any living woman present there. That face was not completely clear, just clear enough to know that it belonged to a woman, very silent, very still, and strangely familiar. Amna wrote that at first she thought it was just her imagination. Then the next night, when the same clothes were being folded again, she felt that someone else was also present in the room. Someone who did not speak, did not walk, but watched. Then this feeling increased over several nights. She began to feel that the old bridal clothes in the trunk were no longer just clothes stored away. Someone was looking at them, touching them, moving around them, and slowly pulling the new bride toward herself. As if she wanted to tie the old bond again with a new life. The letter went on. One night, Amna heard a very faint sound near the door of her room, like the jingling of bangles, even though no woman in the house was wearing jewelry at that hour. When she turned to look, she saw only the edge of a shadow slipping from under the door. Reading this sentence, a cold chill ran down my spine. I looked around the room. Every face was pale, every eye fixed on Aunt Roxana. The morning light was coming through the windows, but inside the room it felt dark and cold. The last part of the letter was even more desperate. The handwriting became messier, as if the writer was afraid she would not get another chance to finish. Amna wrote clearly, "If this paper is ever opened again in the days of a bride, it must never be read after sunset." And on the night it comes out, the old bride's belongings must not be spread again, no folds opened, no suits separated, no photographs looked at. Because something that wakes up once in this house does not attach itself to clothes, jewelry, or trunks. It attaches itself to recognition. And when the new bride begins to recognize it, know that it is already too late. The final sentence was etched in my memory. That thing does not come from memory, it comes from recognition. And when the new bride starts recognizing it, understand that the time has passed. When Aunt Ruxana read this last line in her trembling voice, the atmosphere of the room truly changed. It felt as if the walls had also heard. No one spoke for a few moments. Only the rustle of the paper and everyone's heavy breathing could be heard. Now everything from the previous night began to connect into a blurry line. The cloth that had slipped off the envelope on its own, Sonia's sleepy words, the knocks from upstairs, and that strange presence that all of us had felt differently. At that moment, for the first time, I understood that the elders had not hidden this matter from us just so we would not be afraid. Perhaps they also did not want to face the full truth of it themselves. Sonia was told nothing that day. Openly, they said that the old things had been damaged, that moisture had ruined the clothes, and they were being packed away again so that nothing would cast a shadow during the wedding days. On the surface, this was an ordinary and reasonable thing to say. But this lie could not sustain the house's atmosphere for long, because the matter was no longer limited to the trunk, the envelope, or the old clothes. The real change began to appear in Sonia herself, and in a way that seemed subtle at first. But when one thing after another added up, we began to understand that what we had taken out was not just an old family letter, but the door to something that woke again in the days of a new bride. Around noon, I saw Sonia sitting alone in a corner of the courtyard. She was sitting as if someone was present in front of her, and she was silently listening to them. Her hands were placed in her lap. Her face was slightly tilted to one side, and her eyes were focused not on empty space but on something or someone, with such attention that it seemed she was looking at a face. There was no one around her. No woman, no child, no cousin. But her posture showed such clear interaction that I stopped for a few moments, frozen. When Aunt Ruxana went to her and asked in an ordinary tone what had happened, Sonia did not immediately look up startled. Instead, very slowly, as if emerging from deep thought or from listening to something, she raised her head and asked, "Who wrote that letter?" Hearing these words, the hands of two women present in the room literally stopped. None of us had mentioned the envelope, the seal, the letter, or anything written in it in front of her. Aunt Ruxana quickly changed her tone and said, "What letter? You are just tired." But the expression in Sonia's eyes at that moment was not ordinary curiosity. She was not asking as someone hearing about a hidden thing for the first time. She was asking as if someone had already told her something, as if she was asking for the rest of a half-heard story, or as if some hidden connection had already formed between her and that letter that only we could not understand. That night, the first clear mark of true fear was left. Sonia was sleeping in the inner room with her two sisters and Aunt Ruxana. At some hour of the night, perhaps between 12 and 1, a sudden cry of alarm came from inside. When we rushed there, Sonia was sitting straight up in bed. Her eyes were open, but she did not seem fully conscious. On the floor in front of her lay her red dupatta, which had been placed on the cupboard handle before sleeping. Aunt Ruxana said that perhaps it had fallen in her sleep. But the problem was not that the dupatta had fallen. The problem was that it was not crumpled. It was spread out, as if someone had lifted it, placed it on their shoulders, and then slowly thrown it to the ground. Sonia said in a very hoarse voice, "Don't pick it up. It is not mine." Then the very next moment she seemed to be startled by her own words and began to cry. She was given water, prayers were recited over her, and everyone assumed it was just a bad dream. But after that night, the arrangement of the room was changed. No one mentioned the envelope or the trunk, but everyone was connecting them in their hearts. The next morning, Sonia's complexion was even paler. She ate very little breakfast. And the strangest thing was that, although she recognized people, there was a delay, as if for a moment she saw someone else's reflection on their faces. Around noon, another incident occurred that truly shook us. Sonia was sitting in the room with her younger sister when her sister screamed and ran outside. We went in and found Sonia sitting in front of a mirror. The bangles that had been placed in front of her were now arranged one by one on the table. Her younger sister said, crying, that Sonia was looking into the mirror and talking to someone. She was saying, "This color will not suit me. Where is that old dupatta of yours?" When we asked Sonia, she first denied it. Then, after a few moments, she said very softly, "Someone was standing behind me in the mirror. I thought it was Aunt Ruxana." But the problem was that the position of the mirror was such that anyone standing behind her would have been visible to everyone else in the room. There was no one there. Yet Sonia kept looking at the mirror as if a faint lingering reflection still existed on its surface. That same day, in the afternoon, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Sonia was walking from the courtyard toward the inner rooms when she suddenly stopped. There was nothing in front of her, but her eyes traveled from top to bottom as if someone was standing right in the doorway. She took a step back, changed her path, and walked along the wall to go inside. When I asked her later, she said, "You people really cannot see anything, can you?" Her tone had no doubt. It had resignation, as if she was slowly coming to the belief that whatever was approaching her wanted only her to see it. On the third day, after the evening prayer, the most terrifying incident occurred. The women had gathered around Sonia to dress her. Outside, the bulbs in the courtyard were lit. The distant clinking of dishes, the muffled voices of children, and the smell of food from the kitchen all indicated that wedding preparations were in full swing. But inside the room where Sonia was seated, the atmosphere had become completely separate. Sonia's hair was being combed. Clothes and jewelry were laid out in front of her. 2 or 3 women were looking at the henna on her hands. Suddenly, she slowly turned her neck and began to stare at the corner of the room where a small silver box, one of the items taken from the old trunk, had been temporarily placed. Her gaze remained fixed there for several seconds. She did not even blink. Then the color drained from her face as if someone had pulled all the warmth out from inside her. Her lips moved, but her voice was so soft that if the room had not fallen completely silent at that moment, perhaps we would not have heard it. She says, "I have come late. This house was hers first." After that one sentence, time seemed to stop in the room. For a moment, no woman moved. Then suddenly, noise erupted. Someone immediately began reciting prayers. Someone placed a hand on Sonia's head. Someone started reciting the powerful verses near her ear. 1 or 2 women said in panic that the silver box should be thrown out immediately. But Aunt Ruxana strictly forbade it and said, "Do not take anything to the courtyard. Do not touch anything hastily." At that moment, for the first time with full intensity, I felt that the real fear was not just that some unnatural thing was present in the house. The real fear was that it was slowly encircling Sonia's mind, her tongue, and her identity. It did not just want to appear before her. It wanted the new bride to feel it, to recognize it, and even if only for a moment, to make space for it inside herself. The expression on Sonia's face at that time was not ordinary fear. She was not looking around like a terrified person. Her eyes were fixed on one spot, as if she really was seeing someone whom we could not see. Aunt Ruxana immediately called my uncle, and within moments, the men of the house also gathered outside the door. Seeing the state inside, the color drained from everyone's faces. This was the moment when it was decided that it was necessary to call an elderly religious scholar from the neighborhood, someone wise and experienced. The imam of our local mosque, whom everyone called Maulana Niyam, lived nearby and was familiar with our family. He had visited the house several times during the wedding preparations. But this time, when he was called, It was not for a ritual or a prayer. It was for a real and urgent fear. Within about 15 to 20 minutes he arrived. With his arrival, a strange difference was felt in the atmosphere of the house. It was not that the fear immediately vanished, but it was as if a wandering feeling had found a center. He came straight into the room where Sonia was sitting. He did not ask unnecessary questions. He did not show irritation. He did not start loudly reciting things that would make the atmosphere more dramatic. For the first few moments, he simply stood silently. He looked at the room. He looked at Sonia's face. He looked at the corner where the silver box was kept. Then he said very gently, "Do not all speak at once. One person tell me the whole matter from the beginning." Aunt Ruxana, in a trembling voice, narrated everything. The old trunk, the envelope, the seal, the letter, Sonia's words over the past 2 days, the sounds at night, and what had just happened moments ago. Maulana Niam listened in complete silence. There was no panic on his face, only a serious attention. When Aunt Ruxana finished, he immediately did 2 things. First, he said, "Remove all unnecessary crowd from around Sonia. Only 2 women should stay. Everyone else step back a little." Then, without touching the silver box himself, he asked for a clean cloth. He wrapped the box in the cloth and had it placed separately in a corner of the room. After this, he did not sit on a chair near Sonia. Instead, he sat on the floor so that his voice and presence would be softer and closer to her, not like a command. He took Sonia's name very softly. The first time, she did not respond. The second time, he said, "Sonia, Beta, look at me." She slowly raised her eyes. But God is my witness. There was such unfamiliarity in her gaze for a few moments that it is still alive in my memory. As if she was trying to recognize who the person sitting in front of her was and whether she should answer him. Maulana Niam did not immediately recite anything loudly. First, he recited the opening chapter of the Quran very slowly, then the powerful verses of the throne, then the chapters of refuge. His manner was not as if he was reciting for an audience. It was as if he was placing each verse with calmness into the atmosphere of the room. In between, he would pause, place his hand near Sonia's head and blow lightly. Then he would continue reciting. After a few minutes, he asked for water. He recited over it and said, "Let Sonia's lips be lightly moistened with it. Do not force anything down her throat." When the water touched her lips, a slight shiver ran through Sonia's hands. She suddenly closed her eyes and seemed to shrink, as if from an intense cold. At that moment, the temperature in the room truly seemed to change. I was standing near the door, and I can swear that the air suddenly became cold, even though the weather outside was not like that. But Maulana Niam's face showed no change. He simply strengthened his voice slightly and began reciting some verses from a longer chapter. Sonia sat silently at first, then her breathing quickened. Without opening her eyes, she said very softly, "This is my room." One of the women in the room involuntarily let out a sob, but Maulana Niam immediately gestured with his hand for everyone to remain silent. He again took Sonia's name and said, "Beta, recite the declaration of faith." Sonia's lips moved, but the voice that came out was not in her ordinary tone. It was very faint, heavy, and sounded strangely aged, as if a tired older woman's voice was emerging from deep inside. She said, "I told you, do not be late." This time, even the men standing outside the room heard it, and for a moment, complete silence fell over the entire house. Maulana Niam now raised his voice, but still with control. He recited blessings on the Prophet again and repeatedly recited the powerful verses, blowing gently. And he kept saying, "This is Allah's house. This is Allah's servant. No connection, no deception, no old recognition is greater than Allah's command." His words are still remembered by me today because he was not just reciting prayers. He was setting a boundary. Maulana Niam continued his recitation for nearly half an hour. During that time, Sonia's state kept changing. Sometimes she would go completely limp. Sometimes her eyelids would flutter rapidly. Sometimes she would suddenly stare at a particular corner of the room. But now, the fixed, frozen grip in her eyes was slowly beginning to lessen. Finally, Maulana Niam placed his hands on her head and shoulders, blew firmly, and for the first time, tears came from Sonia's eyes. She did not sob loudly. The tears just flowed as if some fear that had been suppressed inside for a long time had suddenly softened. When her condition had steadied somewhat, Maulana Niam sat the family members down separately and gave a few instructions. He said that from now on, the letter or the old belongings should not be mentioned in front of Sonia. She should not be left alone. At night, the recitation of a particular chapter of the Quran should continue in her room. And most importantly, the old bridal items should never be opened again in her name, whether for ritual, sentiment, or curiosity. He also said something that stayed with me. Sometimes, with old things, not just family memories are attached. Some psychological and spiritual burdens cling to them as well. And when the house itself begins to regard those things as special, a person with a sensitive heart or a delicate nature feels that connection before others do. He did not scare anyone with cheap talk. He did not say, "This is definitely this or that." But his tone made us understand that the matter was not ordinary. Before leaving, he blew on Sonia one last time, gave her blessed water to drink, and said to Aunt Ruxana, "Do not leave her in the grip of fear. Leave her in the remembrance of God." After that night, for the first time, a kind of peace came to the house, not complete, but not scattered either. Sonia did not become exactly as she was before, but the frozen quality in her eyes had broken. The next day was the wedding day. The house was filled with noise and activity again. People came and went. The cooks were busy. The caterers arrived. Relatives who had not yet come finally showed up. The courtyard was once again crowded with laughter, chatter, and the chaos of a Desi wedding. But for those of us who had witnessed the previous days, there was an undercurrent of tension beneath all the celebration. The old trunk had been moved to a locked room upstairs. The envelope and the letter had been wrapped in a clean white cloth and placed inside a cupboard that was then sealed with a piece of tape. No one spoke of them, but everyone remembered. Sonia was dressed as a bride. She looked beautiful, but there was a tiredness in her eyes that makeup could not hide. Her mother and aunts fussed over her, adjusting her dupatta, fixing her jewelry, applying the final touches of glitter on her face. She sat quietly, allowing them to do their work. But every now and then I would catch her glancing toward the room where the old trunk was kept. I asked Tariq, "Do you think she knows what happened? Does she remember any of it?" He shook his head. "I don't think so. The Maulana said her mind would protect itself. She might not recall anything clearly." That was small comfort, because even if she did not remember with her conscious mind, something in her still seemed to be listening, waiting. The Barat arrived in the evening. The groom came with his family, drums beating, lights flashing, the whole street lit up. The men greeted each other with embraces. The women sang wedding songs. The children ran between people's legs with plates of sweets. Sonia was brought out to the stage in the courtyard. She sat beside the groom, her face partially hidden by her dupatta. The photographer directed them this way and that. Relatives posed for pictures. Everyone smiled. But I noticed that Sonia kept her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her knuckles were white. The nikah ceremony was performed. The Maulana recited the verses. The groom said Qabul Hai 3 times and the marriage contract was signed. Applause broke out. Sweets were distributed. Someone threw rose petals. And just like that, Sonia was married. The groom took her hand and led her inside for the formal dinner. The night went on with music, food, and laughter. By midnight, most of the guests had left. The groom's family departed to their own arrangements, and Sonia was to leave the next morning. That night, after everything had quieted down, Aunt Ruxana called me and Tariq aside. She said, "I want you two to take the trunk and everything from that storeroom and move them to the outbuilding in the back of the house. Not tonight, tomorrow after Sonia leaves, but I want you to know what is in there besides the letter." I asked, "There is more?" She nodded. "The silver box, the one Sonia stared at. It was not always in that trunk. It came later. Your grandmother told me once that when Amna's wedding was called off, yes, called off, not completed, she returned home with that box. No one ever opened it. Amna herself said it should never be opened, just kept closed." Tariq asked, "What is inside?" Aunt Ruxana looked at us with tired eyes. "I don't know, and I don't want to know. The Maulana said that some things are better left unopened. That box has been sealed for over 60 years. It will stay sealed." We agreed, but that night I could not sleep. I kept thinking about the silver box. What could be inside that had such power that even after 60 years it could reach out and touch a new bride's mind? And why did Amna, the one who wrote that terrified letter, bring it back with her when her wedding was called off? The next morning Sonia left. She wore a red dress, her face covered, her eyes downcast as she stepped into the car. Her mother cried. Her sisters cried. Even Aunt Ruxana, who had been so strong throughout, wiped her eyes. Sonia did not cry. She just sat quietly looking out the window. But just before the car pulled away, she turned her head and looked back at the house. Her gaze went up, toward the room where the trunk was kept. Then she looked down at me, standing at the gate. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but then the car started moving and she was gone. I stood there for a long time, wondering what she had wanted to say. Later that day, as the house began to empty of guests, Tariq and I went upstairs to move the trunk. The storeroom felt different in the daylight, just a dusty old room with forgotten things. The trunk was heavy, but with two of us, we managed to carry it down the stairs and through the courtyard to the outbuilding at the back. The outbuilding was a small, windowless room that had once been used for storing firewood. It was cool and dark, and the air was stale. We placed the trunk in the corner, next to an old wooden bed frame that had been there for years. We also carried the silver box separately, still wrapped in the cloth Maulana Niam had used. I held it in my hands. It was small, no bigger than a teacup, but it was heavier than it looked. The metal was tarnished, dark with age. I could feel a faint coldness through the cloth, or perhaps it was just my imagination. Tariq said, "Should we put it inside the trunk?" I thought for a moment. No, the Maulana said to keep everything together, but the box was not originally in the trunk. Let's keep it separate. We placed the box on a small shelf in the outbuilding, covered it with another cloth, and locked the door. I put the key on a high nail in the kitchen, where no one would easily find it. That evening the house felt empty. The cots were folded. The extra beds were removed. The leftover food was distributed. The smell of spices still lingered, but slowly it would fade. My mother came and sat beside me. She said, "You have been quiet all day." I told her about the box, about the coldness I had felt. She listened, then said, "Your great-aunt Amna was a troubled woman. She never married. She lived in this house until she died, always alone, always quiet. People said she saw things. She would sometimes stand at the window at night looking out, and when someone asked her what she was looking at, she would say, 'She is walking in the courtyard.' No one knew who she meant." I asked, "Did anyone ever see anything?" My mother shrugged. Some said yes, some said no, but everyone agreed that the house had a certain heaviness after sunset. Your grandmother always recited the Quran before sleeping. She never missed a night. That night I slept in the courtyard room alone. Tariq had gone back to his city. Asad had left earlier. The house was quiet. I woke up at some hour, I do not know when. The moonlight was coming through the window, casting pale shadows on the floor. The room was cold. I pulled the blanket up to my chin. And then I heard it. A very faint sound, like bangles jingling, coming from the direction of the outbuilding. I sat up. My heart was pounding. The sound came again, soft, distant. I told myself it was the wind or an animal or the old wood settling. But wood does not sound like bangles. I lay back down and recited the verses of protection until my lips were tired. The sound did not repeat. After a while, I fell asleep. In the morning, I went to the outbuilding. The lock was still in place. The door was shut. I opened it and looked inside. The trunk was where we had left it. The silver box was on the shelf, still covered with the cloth. But the cloth had shifted. One corner of the box was visible. I did not touch it. I covered it again, locked the door, and walked away. That afternoon, I called Maulana Niyam and told him about the sound. He said, "Do not go to that outbuilding alone at night. Do not open the box. Do not try to find out what is inside. Some doors are kept locked for a reason." I asked, "Will it stay quiet?" He was silent for a moment. Then he said, it might not. These things are not always active. They wait. They watch for weakness, for loneliness, for fear. The best protection is not to give it any of those." I thanked him and hung up. The next day I left the town and returned to my own city. Life went on. I got busy with work, with friends, with the ordinary routines of existence. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The memory of that wedding began to fade. But not completely. Sometimes late at night when I am alone, I remember the sound of bangles. I remember the coldness of the silver box. I remember Sonia's face when she says I have come late. This house was hers first. And I wonder whose house was it really? Who was that woman whose reflection had appeared in the trunk? Was she a jinn, a ghost, an ancestor whose connection to the house had never been severed? I do not know. I never found out. But I know one thing. When the old trunk was opened, something woke up. It did not leave when the trunk was moved. It did not leave when Sonia got married. It simply retreated to the outbuilding, to the dark, to the waiting. A few months after the wedding, I received a call from Aunt Ruxana. She sounded different, more relaxed. She said, "I wanted to tell you, Sonia is expecting. She is happy. Her husband is good to her. She does not remember any of the strange things from before." I said, "That is good news." She paused, then added, "But last week her mother-in-law called me. She said that Sonia sometimes talks in her sleep. Not often, just once in a while. She says the same thing. I told you, do not be late." I felt a chill. "Does Sonia know she says this?" I asked. "No," Aunt Ruxana said. "And we are not going to tell her. It is probably nothing, just a dream." Probably nothing. But I remembered the letter. Amna had written, "When the new bride begins to recognize it, know that it is already too late." Sonia did not recognize anything consciously, but something in her remembered. Something in her still heard that voice. I told you, do not be late. I never visited that house again. I made excuses. Work, distance, other commitments. The truth was that I was afraid, not of the house itself, but of what I might feel if I stepped inside again. Would I hear the bangles? Would I see a shadow in the courtyard? Would I feel the cold presence watching from the outbuilding? I did not want to find out. Years passed. The house is still there in that old part of town. The trunk is still in the outbuilding. The silver box is still covered with cloth on that shelf. The key is still on the nail in the kitchen. No one has opened it. No one will. Sometimes I think about Amna, the woman who wrote that letter, who saw the face in the trunk, who came back from her wedding and lived alone until she died. Did she ever escape it? Or did she live with it every day, feeling that presence, hearing that voice, until her last breath? I hope not. I hope she found peace. But the letter she left behind was not a letter of peace. It was a warning that had stayed hidden for decades, until we, in our innocence and our curiosity, took it out again. We did not mean to wake anything. We just wanted to see old clothes, old photographs, old memories. We did not know that some memories are not memories, they are traps. They are not kept, they are kept waiting. I am telling this story now so that others might be careful. In family gatherings, when old trunks are opened, when old letters are read, When old jewelry is brought out, be mindful. Not every old thing is just an old thing. Some carry more than dust. Some carry echoes. And some carry something that has been waiting, patient and silent to be recognized again. May God protect us all. May He protect every bride, every home, every family from things that hide in the shadows of old memories. May He give us the wisdom to know when to look back and when to close the door. If you like this story, please like the video and leave a kind comment. Subscribe to the channel for more true stories of fear, faith, and the unseen. We will meet again, God willing, with another story. 5 years passed. I did not return to that ancestral house. Not once. I told myself it was because I was busy, because life had taken me to another city, because there was no reason to go back. But the truth was simpler and uglier. I was afraid. Not of the house itself, but of what I might find there. The memory of that silver box, the coldness through the cloth, the sound of bangles in the night, they had faded but never disappeared. They lived in a corner of my mind, like a locked room I had promised never to enter. During those 5 years, I heard updates from my mother and Aunt Roxana. Sonia had a daughter, then a son. Her husband was kind. She seemed happy. The strange sleep-talking had continued for a few months after her wedding, but then it stopped. Her mother-in-law had stopped mentioning it. Life had moved on. Aunt Roxana also told me that the old house had been closed. No one lived there anymore. The cousins had all moved to cities. The grandparents had passed. The house stood empty, its wooden door locked, its courtyard silent. She had wanted to sell it, but there were no buyers. People said it was too old, too remote, too much work. I knew the real reason no one wanted to buy it. The same reason no one from the family wanted to stay there overnight. The same reason that even during the wedding, some of the older relatives had avoided certain rooms after sunset. The house had a reputation, not loud, not spoken of openly, just a quiet understanding that passed from one generation to the next. Be careful in that house. Do not open old trunks at night. Do not leave bridal clothes unfolded after dark. And never, ever go looking for something that does not wish to be found. I thought that was the end of it, a closed chapter, a strange story from the past that we would occasionally mention at family gatherings, shake our heads at, and then forget. But last year, something happened that pulled me back. My mother called me early one morning. Her voice was different, not panicked, but heavy, as if she had been carrying a weight for a long time and had finally decided to put it down. She said, "Your Aunt Roxana has been admitted to the hospital. She is not seriously ill, but she has been asking for you. She wants to tell you something before she forgets. Her memory is not what it used to be." I took the next train. The hospital was in the same town where the ancestral house stood. I had not been there in 5 years. The streets looked smaller, shabbier. The old bazaar had changed. Some shops were gone, replaced by new ones. But the lane to the house was the same, narrow, shaded by overhanging balconies, with the same crooked electric pole at the corner. I did not go to the house. I went straight to the hospital. Aunt Roxana was sitting up in bed, looking frail but alert. Her hair had gone completely gray. Her hands were thin, the veins visible under the skin, but her eyes were still sharp. When she saw me, she smiled and said, "You came." I sat beside her. My mother was there too, along with one of my cousins. The room smelled of medicine and old age. Aunt Roxana took my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. She said, "I have been thinking about that wedding, about the trunk, about the letter. I have been thinking about it for years, and I have decided that you should know the rest." I frowned. The rest? I thought we knew everything. The letter, the silver box, Amna's story. She shook her head slowly. "No, there is more. I did not tell you then because I was afraid, not of the thing in the house. I was afraid of what you would think of me, of what the family would say." My mother looked at her sister with concern. "Roxana, you do not have to." "I do," Aunt Roxana interrupted. "I have to before I forget, before it is too late." She closed her eyes for a moment, gathering herself. Then she began to speak. She told me that after Sonia's wedding, after we had moved the trunk to the outbuilding, she had gone back to that room alone. Not at night, during the day, when the sun was high. She had opened the outbuilding door, gone inside, and sat in front of the trunk for a long time. I wanted to know, she said. I had to know what Amna had seen, what had frightened her so much that she wrote that letter and never opened the box again. I asked, did you open the box? She shook her head. No, I did not have the courage, but I opened the trunk again. I went through the clothes, the photographs, the old things, and at the very bottom, underneath everything, I found something else. A small diary, Amna's diary. My heart began to beat faster. What was in it? Aunt Ruxana took a sip of water from the cup on the bedside table. Her hand trembled slightly. Then she said, Amna did not write only about the face in the trunk. She wrote about the woman behind the face, the one who came to her at night. She paused, then continued. According to the diary, the woman first appeared to Amna when she was 16, not as a ghost, but as a presence, a feeling. Amna would wake up in the middle of the night and feel someone sitting at the foot of her bed. She could never see her clearly, just a shadow, a shape, but she could hear her breathing. Slow, heavy, patient. The woman never spoke for the first 2 years. She just watched. Then when Amna's engagement was announced, she began to speak. She would whisper, "This house is mine. You are only visiting. You will never leave here as a bride." Aunt Ruxana's voice dropped to a whisper. Amna wrote that she tried to tell her mother, but her mother said it was just nightmares. Her mother said every girl feels anxious before marriage. No one believed her. So the wedding happened. Yes, but on the wedding night in her husband's house, Amna saw the woman again. Standing in the corner of the room, the groom could not see her. No one else could, but Amna could. And the woman said, "You cannot stay here. This is not your home. Come back." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach, so she came back. Aunt Ruxana nodded. She came back the next day. She told her family that the marriage was not right, that she could not live there. They were angry, ashamed, but they took her back, and she never married again. I thought about this. The woman who haunted Amna had driven her away from her own wedding. She had kept her in the family house, alone, for the rest of her life. And then, when Amna died, the woman had waited. She had waited for the next bride, for the next young woman who would come to that house full of hope and expectation. She had waited for Sonia. Did Amna ever try to get rid of her? I asked. Aunt Ruxana sighed. She tried everything. Prayers, amulets, holy water, even a faith healer. Nothing worked. The woman would leave for a few days, but she always came back. She was tied to the house, or maybe she was tied to the family. I do not know. And the silver box. Amna wrote that the box was given to her by an old woman in the village, someone who claimed to know about such things. The old woman told her to put a lock of her own hair inside the box, along with a piece of the wedding dress she had worn. She said that if the woman ever tried to attach herself to a new bride, the box would contain her, keep her bound. I remembered the coldness I had felt when I held the box. Did it work? Aunt Ruxana looked at me with tired eyes. It worked for Amna. She never saw the woman again after she put the box in the trunk, but she also never married. She stayed in this house alone until she died. Maybe the box trapped the woman, but it also trapped Amna. She could not leave. She could not live a normal life. And when we opened the trunk, we released her. I think so, Aunt Ruxana said. The box was still sealed. The hair and the cloth were still inside. But when we moved the trunk, when we unfolded the clothes and looked at the photographs, we gave her attention. And attention is what she wants. She is not evil, not in the way we think of evil. She is just hungry, hungry for recognition, for someone to see her, for someone to say, "This was your house." I asked the question that had been haunting me for years. Who was she? Who was the woman in the trunk? Aunt Ruxana hesitated. Then she said, I searched the family records after reading Amna's diary. I found a name, a woman who lived in that house about 100 years ago. She was married into the family, but her husband died soon after the wedding. She never remarried. She stayed in the house, but she was never really accepted. The other women treated her as an outsider. She died young in that same house, in that same room where we kept the trunk. She died alone. Yes, and before she died, she told the servant who attended her that she would never leave, that the house would always be hers, that no other woman would ever take her place. I felt a chill run down my spine, and no one thought to do anything. No prayers, no rituals. Aunt Ruxana shook her head. They thought she was just bitter. They buried her and moved on, but she did not move on. She stayed. She attached herself to the house, to the old bridal clothes, to the trunk. And over the years, she attached herself to the brides. Not all of them, just the ones who were sensitive, just the ones who could feel her. I thought about Sonia, about the way she had stared at the empty corner, the way she had spoken in someone else's voice, the way she had said, "This house was hers first." "What happened to the box?" I asked. "Is it still in the outbuilding?" Aunt Ruxana nodded. "It is still there, and the trunk, and the clothes, everything is still there. I could not bring myself to throw them away. I could not burn them. I was afraid of what might happen if I did." "We should call Maulana Niyam," I said. "Maulana Niyam passed away 2 years ago," she replied quietly. "There is no one else. The younger ones do not understand these things. They would laugh or they would overreact. Either way, it would not help." I sat back in my chair. The room was quiet except for the beeping of the medical monitors. My mother was crying silently. My cousin stared at the floor. Aunt Ruxana squeezed my hand. "I am telling you this not because I want you to fix it. I am telling you so that someone knows, so that the story does not die with me, so that when you have children you can warn them. Do not open that trunk again. Do not spend the night in that house alone. And if you ever feel a cold presence in the room, do not acknowledge it. Do not speak to it. Do not look for it." I promised her I would remember. I promised her I would tell the next generation. That night I could not sleep. I lay in my hotel room, staring at the ceiling, going over everything she had told me. The woman in the trunk, the hungry ghost who wanted recognition, the silver box with the lock of hair and the piece of wedding dress, Amna, who had sacrificed her own happiness to keep the woman contained, and Sonia, who had almost been taken. The next morning, before I left the town, I did something I had sworn I would never do. I went to the ancestral house. The street was empty. The wooden door was locked, the brass nails tarnished. I stood there for a long time looking at the door, remembering the sounds of laughter and clattering dishes from the wedding. The house looked smaller than I remembered, sadder. I did not go inside. I did not have the key, and even if I had, I would not have used it. Instead, I walked around to the back of the house where the outbuilding stood. It was a small, low structure, its roof covered with dried leaves. The door was padlocked, the lock rusted. I touched the lock. It was cold, very cold. I stepped back. I closed my eyes and recited the verses of protection. When I opened them, nothing had changed. The lock was still cold. The door was still shut. The thing inside was still waiting. I turned and walked away. I did not look back. On the train home, I wrote down everything Aunt Ruxana had told me. I added my own memories of that week, the sounds, the shadows, the way Sonia had stared at the corner. I wrote it all in a notebook, and when I finished, I put the notebook in a drawer in my desk. I will keep it there. Perhaps one day one of my children or grandchildren will find it. Perhaps they will read it and think it is just a story. Perhaps they will believe it. I do not know. What I know is that some things are not meant to be disturbed. Old trunks hold more than old clothes. Old houses hold more than old memories. And sometimes the dead do not rest. They wait. They watch. They hunger. Aunt Ruxana was released from the hospital a week later. She went back to her own home, not to the ancestral house. She never returned to it. She died peacefully in her sleep 3 months after that conversation. I like to think that she was not afraid at the end. I like to think that whatever had haunted the house had not followed her. Sonia still lives with her husband and children. She has never returned to the town. She never asks about the ancestral house. When someone mentions it, she changes the subject. I do not know if she remembers the things that happened during her wedding days. I do not ask. The house still stands, empty, locked, waiting. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the woman in the trunk. I wonder if she is still there, packing the dark rooms, standing at the window, watching the street for a new bride. I wonder if she will ever find peace. I hope she does, but I am not sure she wants it. Some people, even in death, would rather haunt than heal. May God protect us all from such attachments. May He give us the courage to close doors that should remain closed, and may He forgive us for opening the ones we should have left shut. I have told this story as it was told to me, and as I lived it. I have changed the names, but the events are true. If you ever come across an old trunk in a family house, if you ever find a sealed envelope or a silver box that feels too cold, leave them where they are. Do not open them. Do not wonder what is inside. Do not invite her in. This is the end of the story. If you liked it, please like the video and leave a kind comment. Subscribe to the channel for more true stories of the unseen. May God keep you all in His protection. We will meet again, God willing, with another story.